to bring in former CDC Director Robert Redfield. Man, you thought we'd lose you over time, Doc, but here we are yet again, and good morning to you. David Morenz is a former aide for Dr. Fauci, and apparently he said in 2021 about this email matter, he said, I can either send stuff to Tony on his private Gmail or hand it to him at work. He is too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble. He has also proven to be a pretty tough customer when it comes to questions. What do you think they get from this hearing?
You know, Bill, I'm not certain. I hope it's an opportunity for Tony to be relatively transparent with the American people and let people understand how he's thinking and why he made what decisions that he made. I think it's an opportunity for him to try to express the rationale behind some of the decisions that he made.
Nicole Malliotakis, she's from Staten Island, Congresswoman, and she is on this committee. She was on Fox and Friends first this morning. Listen here.
We're uncovering a lot of discrepancies between what Dr. Fauci has told the committee and what his senior advisor and other staff members at NIH have told the committee. It's trying to get to the bottom of the accountability. Who is lying to this committee? Who's committing perjury? Who is responsible for the destruction of government records? Whose idea was it to use a Gmail, personal Gmail, instead of using government email to avoid freedom of information laws? That's what we're trying to uncover here.
So there is that, and that also then gets to also the other question, which is, how did this originate in the first place? And I think he'll get a lot of questions about the funding of the lab in Wuhan, where it looks like a lot of people, even Democrats and Republicans on this committee, are looking at this saying the evidence is pointing us to a lab leak.
Yeah, I think two things, Dana. I think first, very disappointing to me as someone who spent more than 40 years in public service that there was such an orchestrated effort to get around the Freedom of Information rules and federal record rules. I think Dr. Morenz's testimony was extremely disheartening for those of us that are in public service, that there was such a concerted effort to get around the freedom of information, and some more of that will come out hopefully in the hearing today. Related to origin, I've always said, you know, I hear all the time on the news that all the evidence points to spillover. I will argue there's no evidence for spillover. There's a lot of opinions by people spillover. I think, as you commented, the evidence that's mounted over the last 3 or 4 years is highly supportive of a laboratory origin for this virus. And, you know, I happen to believe that that the fact that certain people, I think, took this position, NIH in particular, the leadership, to go after spillover, they thought they were protecting science. I think in reality what they did was, by not aggressively going after both hypotheses, including the lab leak, is actually they ended up hurting the credibility of science.
Wow, interesting. Here's another one from Morenz that you mentioned there. I learned from our FOIA, Freedom of Information Act lady. That's quite the phrase, isn't it? Here, how to make emails disappear after I'm FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we are all safe. So that's out there. I think what a lot of Americans are wondering, you know, if tax dollars went to the Wuhan lab, we need to know. And if gain of function achieved this, we need to know. And how much have you thought about how we prevent the next virus from happening?
Yeah, I think it's so important, Bill. I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where I called for a moratorium on gain of function research. I think gain of function research, in my view, my opinion, is what caused this pandemic. It was a pandemic that was really caused by scientific arrogance. That we're at risk for another pandemic. There's a lot in the news about bird flu. It does have the potential to cause a pandemic at some point. I don't think it's likely to happen from spillover, but I do think it's likely to happen from gain of function research in the laboratory. So I don't see the necessity for this research. There are some scientists, Collins and Fauci, who've been big advocates of gain of function research. This is what I mean when I hear they're trying to protect science. They're trying to protect the ability to do gain of function research and not have it regulated. I think that's a mistake. I think we need to put a moratorium on it. This is the type of research that has to be highly regulated. And I think that's really at the heart of a major disagreement that I've had with Tony over the years.
Many Democrats, some Democrats on the committee are frustrated and saying that the Republicans are too backwards looking at the origins of COVID and trying to figure that out, rather than thinking about future possible pandemics, as you just mentioned. Do you have a view as to whether it matters to try to get to the bottom of how COVID started?
Yeah, Dana, I think it's really important because, it's going to take a lot of energy to put in place what we need to put in place to prevent a future pandemic. And a lot of that, I think, will come from a clear understanding, a broad consensus of society of how this pandemic started. Like I said, I think this pandemic started in the laboratory as part of scientific experiments. And if you just sort of forget about that and don't even try to raise that as an issue, there's not the energy that's going to be required to really put in, I think, the regulations that are going to be required to restrict gain-of-function research. Right now, gain-of-function research is being done in university labs all over the world, and they don't have the proper containment to control that gain-of-function research. I remind people when I was CDC director, one of the things I had to do that wasn't pleasant was I had to shut down Fort Detrick, the Army's premier laboratory for high containment pathogens. I had to shut them down because they were violating the containment rules. We don't have a rigor biocontainment in many of these university labs that are doing this research, and so I do think we need to call on a moratorium. It shouldn't be decided by scientists. It should be decided by a broader group of society whether this research is of value, and if it has to be done, how can it be done in a safe, responsible, and effective way?
It's a remarkable thing to say. Doctor, thanks for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us. Remember in the early days of COVID, we were running to Anthony Fauci to get his comments on so many things, and it's extraordinary now, 4 years later, how so much of that has changed. Dr. Robert Redfield, thank you again. We'll speak soon.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.